Well, ladies and gentlemen, now we are heading to the Symposium 5 under the topic of cross-cutting issues on COVID-19. This session will be led by our moderator, Mr. Anis Fuad from Universitas Gadjah Mada. Here it is the profile of Mr. Anis Fuad. He is a researcher and lecturer on population health informatics, and his research interests are in public health informatics, digital epidemiology, bibliometrics, and social network analysis. He began his studies with a bachelor in medicine at Universitas Gadjah Mada, then proceeded to complete a master's in medical informatics and communication technology at the Faculty de Medicine Broussais Hotel de Université Paris. And Anis Fuad has more than 15 years of experience in various consultancies, research and related activities in collaboration with the Ministry of Health, BPJS Kesehatan, hospitals, district health office, and private sectors. He has published more than 30 articles in scientific journals and local newspapers. Mr. Anis is also a working council member of AEHIN or ASIAI Health Information Network. In 2021, he was appointed as the head of the Data and Information Division of PERSI or Indonesian Hospital Association. Mr. Anis Fuad is also a co-principal investigator for the Regulatory and Box for E-Malaria, LPDP Ministry of Finance 2020 until 2022. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to give the time to our moderator. Please, the time is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Master of Ceremony. I am very delighted to be moderator in this Symposium 5. This is a very interesting topic actually when we are going to discuss cross-cutting issues in pandemic or in the COVID-19. As we know that cross-cutting, usually we are talking about topics that previously to be discussed in detail in each discipline. But right now in the COVID-19, this topic becoming a common interest, especially on the COVID-19. We are very delighted that in this topic, the committee already invited 3 speakers with different backgrounds. First one, the public health statistic. The second one, pediatrician, but with strong advanced research on digital and also machine learning. And the third speaker are the IT expert who is working closely at the government institution. As we know, we are entering November. It is the 22nd month after the first case of COVID-19 was announced by the president. So in these 30 months, there are several things are going on and very important changes are occurred in our country. When we are talking about a life cycle, for example, 32nd months for toddlers could become a time when a toddler becomes very active, socially or actively. But when we are talking 32nd months on the pandemic, what will be happen next? Whether the pandemic is going to the endemic situation, what are the changes that could be continuously or sustained after the endemic situation? What we need to prepare in terms of the technologies or even on the regulations after the new changes are happening in the COVID-19 situations. We are very happy that in this session I will be moderating the 3 speakers. The first speaker will be public health statistic expert, Dr. Gindo from the University of Manchester, UK. I think he will be joining later directly from Helsinki this morning. And we will have also Dr. Dian Kesumapramudya Nurputra, pediatrician who will speaking about a VOC. VOC is a volatile organic compound, something that becoming a very interesting topic for research currently as a biomarker. And also we will invite the speaker from the Digital Transformation Office, who will speaking about the challenges and also the prospect of citizen health app, which is a PeduliLindungi after the pandemic situation. So for all participants, please prepare your questions that we could later discuss with all speakers. And I would like to invite all panelists to joining these sessions. But first of all, I would like the committee to invite the first speaker, Dr. Gindo Tampubolon. Here is the CV of Dr. Gindo Tampubolon. He is from his name Indonesian, but affiliated at the University of Manchester, UK. He is a senior lecturer at the Global Development Institute at the University of Manchester. He is also visiting professor at the United Nations University of Helsinki. With a lot of research and publication, he will be speaking about how the transition of COVID-19 pandemic into endemic and what need to be prepared for this kind of a transition. Please welcome Dr. Gindo Tampubolon. Time and screen is yours.
Good morning from Helsinki. If it's late, maybe it's afternoon in Yogyakarta. First, I'm Gindo Tampubolon, and I want to thank the organizer for this invite to give a talk on when is the transition from this pandemic COVID-19 to endemic in Indonesia. And the second thing to say is to have a great conference in Yogyakarta or elsewhere where you join. I am going to straight away share my screen and my talk. I hope you can all see this, the title slide. As I said, I was asked to talk about a transition from COVID-19 pandemic to endemic in Indonesia. And I must say, I am here in Helsinki, hosted by the United Nations University, but my home is at the University of Manchester. Let me begin at the beginning, which was nearly 3 years ago. This is familiar to most people. It started at the end of 2019 in Wuhan, and I showed here 2 pictures of doctors who featured early on in the pandemic. Dr. Lee, of course, warned colleagues on social media about the coronavirus, but it is well known that the response of the government was less than brilliant. He was detained on January the 3rd, and he died from COVID-19 on February the 7th. When I first gave a talk on COVID-19 to Indonesians, it was on the 27th of March, 2020. And by then, 27,000 people have died. The other doctor that featured also early in the history of this pandemic is Dr. I. And I will not read what she said, but I will let it stand for 2 seconds. So how is it today? Today we have nearly 15 million excess deaths. This is the report from the WHO released on 5th of May 2022. So 14.9 million excess deaths, and I think we're still counting. And if I look at the ASEAN 5, the founders of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, we can see the immense suffering brought by COVID on families, on businesses, on communities. And in the whole history of this pandemic, tables and statistics can become a blur. But I just want to slowly go through this. I order it based on the worst country hit by this pandemic. So Indonesia at the top. This is from the WHO report I alluded to earlier, and the middle column gives you the summary figure, excess death in 100,000 population. In Indonesian, 100,000 has a word. 10, 100, 1000, selaksa, seketi, sejuta. So 100,000 is seketi. So Indonesia is the worst in ASEAN 5, but much worse than everybody else. More than twice and more than 10 times worse. That's what column 3 tells us. Again, statistics during this pandemic can become a blur, but this is an immense suffering and a deep sadness. More than double the Philippines, more than 10 times Thailand. And I don't think many Indonesians appreciate this, the immense suffering. But of course, the history of this pandemic also witnessed the feat that science managed to bring. And we have benefited from that, of course, because it brings vaccines into human arms, billions of them all around the world. And I just mentioned a number here. I will not read it. This is not a complete list, of course. Yeah. 2 last rows suggest that or show that we now have bivalent vaccines, which can tackle the wild and the new variant vaccines. I've just received one last month back in Manchester. And the last line, I think it's important to note that there are huge government support for vaccine development around the world, and including in Indonesia, I believe. Now, today, I'm talking on the 1st of November, but this is news from the 21st of October. India vaccine maker, the famous Serum Institute of India, destroys 100 million doses of expired COVID jab. So we, in the report, Dr. Purwala, who led the institute, said something that may resonate with many, with billions of people around the world. He said, actually, I'm tired of COVID, talking about COVID. So there's a fatigue around COVID in many parts of the world. However, just a week later, in the same place where it all started, in Wuhan, nearly 3 years after last December of 2019, Wuhan, part of it is now on lockdown again. So nearly 1 million people were sealed in their homes and streets because of COVID. the new variant, and the strategy of the government. So it is quite well known that the Chinese government upheld the zero COVID strategy. So this is what we have today, nearly 3 years after the outbreak. Some fatigue and perhaps a minority of zero COVID strategy. But for countries not following zero COVID strategy, question arises. Of course, people decided not to follow, or countries decided not to follow zero COVID strategy for many reasons. Among them are democratic rights and bureaucratic competence. It is not easy to seal 1 million, 10 million, and in the case of Indonesia, 275 million people. So democratic rights and bureaucratic competence are key factors in choosing what kind of strategy a country pursue. If it is not zero COVID strategy, the question is, when is the transition to endemic COVID-19? A transition into a state that is stable at low levels. And what can Indonesia put in place for that, in addition to what the WHO is going to advise countries around the world? So I'm going to share with you some of the results, mostly from lab results from Caroline Tsai's lab at Yale, which came out this summer, as you can see towards the lower part of my slide, 1st of July 2022. So most of the rest of my talk is based on their result, which they have kindly shared on GitHub. But I then modify the human parameters based on the Malay Mongoloid population, because Tsai's lab worked with mostly the Caucasian European Americans populations, where most of the research done and published. So I modified human parameters based on the Malay Mongoloid population to do two things: to derive the timing and features of the transition to endemic COVID-19, and to draw some preparations for Indonesia. And I draw on two sources in modifying this. One is a work by Taib et al., which came out early this year, January 1st, in fact. So characterization of COVID-19 deaths by vaccination types and status in Malaysia. So the Tsai's lab, Malin et al. In PNAS Nexus, worked with the standard SIR, susceptible, infected, recovered, and right in the middle there, exposed, the standard workhorse in epidemiology. And also they focus on the simplest, most clear-cut. So this is a deterministic SIR model in order to allow us to draw clearest, the clearest features. Yeah, and they added on the right, the two new boxes, vaccinations, twice, to get the features of heterologous vaccinations, as we now observed in real life. Many of our booster vaccines are of a different type from the original vaccines that we received. So there is that feature in here, a commendable one. I will not go into the details of the parameters that they use for rat data infected with Cyanodactylus adenitis virus, but the last 4 rows are important. So E1, E2, yeah, the effectiveness of vaccines. V1, V2, the durations between vaccine doses, and average duration of vaccine-induced immunity, so the strength of protection. So those are the key features for the rat model. And of course, translations into human parameters. Again, the most important thing is the last two: average duration of immunity and average duration of vaccine-induced immunity. So those are the key parameters that I want you to read at. Again, as I mentioned, the codes are available on GitHub, so you're free to download it and play with it. And the sources you can see here on the rightmost column, the sources are there. So feel free to check them out. Now, as I said, I modified human parameters. I do not work with rats. I modified human parameters based on the Malay Mongoloid population's experience. This is Malaysia, that is outlined in Taib et al. That I showed you earlier, and work that I did just a few weeks before their work, actually. So it was in 2021. So here is their result. There's a lot in here on effectiveness of the major vaccines in the Malay Mongoloid population. And I just want you to focus for now on the right column plots. So there are 3 right column plots. And the rows refer to the different vaccines. So the top row refer to, so the right top, inactivated whole variant SARS-CoV-2. This is the CoronaVac and Sinovac. So the rightmost column and the topmost, that's the inactivated whole variant, CoronaVac or Sinovac. The second row, again on the right, is the BNT162b2 mRNA platform. So the platform is different. The top is inactivated whole variant. The middle is the mRNA. And the last is the Oxford AstraZeneca. The last row is Oxford AstraZeneca. So 3 different platforms and 3 different brands of vaccines. I went to a local shop here yesterday looking for, this is a story, by the way, looking for a tissue because I had a bit of a cough. With my non-existent Finnish, I resorted to English to ask for a facial tissue or a table tissue, and no one can find one for me. In my exasperation, I mentioned the brand Kleenex, and then she immediately said, and get me one. So the top line here is for CoronaVac and Sinovac. The middle line is for Pfizer-BioNTech, and the last line is for Oxford AstraZeneca. Those are the brands. Now, if you compare the 3 vaccines, take any of the group, look at any of the plots, and you can see that if you take, for example, the bottom in each plot, so the bottom in each plot is fully vaccinated, no comorbidities. And again, the second plot, fully vaccinated, no comorbidities, and fully vaccinated, no comorbidities as well at the bottom. And you can see that the coefficient for the inactivated whole variant is always to the right of the BNT and AstraZeneca. Take any group. I'll give you the second example. The second example is the second line in each plot. So partially vaccinated, no comorbidities. I hope you can pick that up. Partially vaccinated, no comorbidities. If you look at all the three plots, the inactivated whole variant is always to the right of Pfizer-BioNTech, of AstraZeneca. That's quite a lot to take in. So I produced a simpler one. This is in Indonesian with one mistyped letter. This is in Indonesian, and I think it's a lot easier to understand. AstraZeneca is always on the left, followed by Pfizer, followed by Sinovac or Sinopharm. So the most effective is AstraZeneca, followed by Pfizer, followed by Sinovac. So you can compare it. It's up to you which one you prefer, but I prefer mine. So I produced this in 2021, and theirs came out in 2022, just a few weeks later. They tell the same story of the effectiveness of different vaccines in the population. And this is important as the human parameters to be included in the model. How effective the predominant and the mix of vaccines in the population. So, on to the result. This is for the rats for 365 days, 1 year, on the horizontal axis, and on the vertical axis is the number of rats in each compartment, being infected, being susceptible, being exposed, being seropositive and yet recovered. So that's the legend on the top right. And the two plots are simply an extension of the other. So instead of 365 days, 1,825 days. Yeah. The point to look at here is the susceptible and the recovered, seropositive recovered. That's typically what we look at, of course, the infected as well. And more important than that, of course, is always the dynamic, or the inverse of that, namely the stability. When do we observe stability? So, so this is what we have for rats. If we have vaccinations, things become much more exciting. Excuse me. Things become much more exciting in the dynamics and also much more uncertain in the dynamics of the seropositive recovered. So here we are, we have a model that gives us the results for humans for 365 days and 1,125 days. We also have heterologous vaccinations, 2 doses. And now we go to a much more exciting and much more realistic situation. We have variants now, or in Indonesian, galur baru. Again, we retain the vaccinations, and immediately you see very different dynamics. You see cycles. You see punctuated, regular uptick. So in the seropositive recovered, the blue ones, you can see a clear cycle going on. And also among the susceptible one, you can see that. So this is what happens when there is new variants. It's as if there is a new injection all the time that potentially creates cycles and therefore pushes or delays stability even further and further to the right. So this is the picture for Indonesia. I will put it in one big slide. So you can see the seropositive recovered, the blue one as usual, and the susceptible. And you can begin to see the the potential for cycle because of the punctuated regular uptick in many of these numbers in these compartments of seropositive recovered and the compartment of susceptible groups. So that's what happened for Indonesia. So how can we summarize those trajectories in a few lines? Now, here are the results that I try to summarize, which transcend both species, rats and humans. The pandemic unfolds with marked features, including non-sterilizing immunity, namely, the person is immune, nevertheless can still infect others. There's also a generally declining disease severity, but this is not the same as saying it's not fatal. We also clearly observe punctuated emergence of new variants. And immunity elicited by heterologous vaccination is only temporary. And you can see the trajectories are more driven by vaccination uptake, less by the efficacy of the vaccine alone. But less efficacious second vaccination leads to a cyclic trajectories and delay the arrival at an endemic state, a state where things are stable at low levels. The median time to endemic stability is 1,437 days, about 4 years, with interquartile range 750 days, 1 year on each side, roughly, and with 15% of population remaining susceptible. Eventually, widespread non-sterilizing immunity combined with reduced pathogenicity, like what we observe with the Omicron variant, is a distinct possibility. Particularly reduced pathogenicity that comes with increased transmissibility and with altered tissue tropism. And this is not unique, it has been here before. So now, of course, we have only the upper respiratory tract that is deeply affected, not further down, not further deeper. And this has been observed before. So before I discuss and consider implications, I must admit some limitations with the model. The model is deterministic, it's not stochastic, and death is outside the model. However, given very little work on the transition from pandemic to endemic, especially in non-Caucasian population, and given that not many countries are going to uphold zero COVID policy, the results here have their uses, not least if we borrow from our fellow scientists studying climate change. These results can be used in an ensemble of models, which can be built with varying predicted trajectories as input in order to find out when is the most likely range of transition to endemic. I want to end with discussions and implications. Only three. One is Indonesia needs continuous monitoring of a few key knobs: rates of vaccinations across different age morbidity groups and regions, and effectiveness of vaccines in the population. Like the Malaysian government, which put their data on GitHub for researchers like myself to use, Indonesian government can follow that good example. We have called for this since 1st of March 2020 and repeatedly since, including in this faculty. I've been here many times before the past 3 years. Second, Indonesia needs a drive for vaccination that is fair and systematic. Again, I've been here before at this faculty to talk about the unfair distribution of vaccines in Indonesia. Because without those features of fairness and systematic, it's difficult to control key parameters, including the rates of emergence of new variants, because the reservoir is big enough for mutation to deliver new variants, pushing the trajectories, as you saw, upward regularly and delaying endemic stability. Last, the government should err on the side of giving too much support than too little, because effective heterologous vaccination is key, not merely efficacious ones at trials. It's effective ones in practice. This requires research in the Indonesian population, not in Malaysia or somewhere else. Now I want to leave you, I think, with a hopeful point that the transition from the pandemic to endemic is possible with concerted efforts on the parts of the government, scientists, and communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gindo Tampubolon. It is a recorded session, but I think Dr. Gindo hopefully could join this session as well, directly from Helsinki. It is, I think, early morning from there, but hopefully he could join in the discussion. So, participants, please prepare your questions for the discussion later on. I think Dr. Gindo already provided several insights that need to be followed up by Indonesian government, and also we as scientific communities, and also we as part of the community, to prepare for the next step of the transition from the pandemic into endemic. So we will invite the second speaker. I think he's also among the famous scientific young researchers in Indonesia, especially in Gadjah Mada University. Welcome, Dr. Dian. Are you already here in Zoom?
Thank you for inviting me here.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Dian. Dr. Dian Kesumapramudya is a specialist in pediatric neurology, molecular genetics, and children's intelligence and competence development. He graduated from Faculty of Medicine, University of Brawijaya, and then continued as specialist in pediatrics as well as master in clinical medicine at the Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Gadjah Mada, and followed with a doctoral education at Kobe University in neurogenetics and genetic epidemiology. He's actually among the famous researchers, especially as he joined as part of the co-inventor of genus Covid-19, rapid Covid-19 detection system based on a human breath analysis. And in this session, he will be speaking about the potential of VOC, Volatile Organic Compound, for the biomarker for COVID-19 and also other disease. Please, Dr. Dian, time and screen is yours for the next 20 minutes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anis, for your kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to confirm whether you're already able to see my slide, Dr. Anis.
Going.
Okay. Is my slide is already being seen? Well?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, the committee, for inviting and having me here as I try to share a little knowledge of me about how we can use volatile organic compound as an alternative biomarkers in COVID-19 and maybe other infectious disease. So I hope I can finish with it 20 minutes, but please do remind me and bear with me, Dr. Anis, if it is already almost 1 minute, please remind me. Okay, thank you very much. So actually, the knowledge and scientific background in smell of the breath of a urine and saliva is not coming within just recent years. Hippocrates within 400 years before Christ, and of course, Ibn Sina, or maybe in the Western is famous as Avicenna, has already tried to implement the diagnosis system from a patient with disease by smelling their urine or maybe checking their urine. I tried to look for the photos inside this of the Iranian journal, and we found that there is actually an effort to try to diagnose a disease not only by just taking history taking or physical exam, but also try to smell the several body fluids, including breath. And so I would like to give my talks here and consist of or maybe 5 parts. Please bear with me since the beginning. So the first part, maybe let's try to enlighten your a little bit knowledge about what is the component of the human's breath, especially the exhaled breath. Mostly, actually, around 78% is consists of nitrogen. However, there are around 2 or 3% consist of other gases. Small amount of gases, which is comprises from chemical properties, chemical product, which is known for volatile organic compound, resulted from our metabolism and our process in the body. Usually, respiratory breath also contain other pathogens or other small DNA molecules, which are non-specific RNA, which in the recent years, it can be a model it can be a new biomarker for a diagnosis establishment. So what is actually the source of breath VOCs, ladies and gentlemen? So basically, breath VOCs can be formed by the combination of many factors, including exogenous factors and endogenous. For exogenous factor, actually, kind of environment, what our lifestyle, what food we eat, and what microbiome, for example, reside in our gastrointestinal system, and other else may affect the composition of our VOCs or volatile organic compound. And our endogenous metabolism itself, for example, the metabolism and the inflammation status of our health and the genetic profile in our body also influence to a certain degree to the proportion and composition of the VOCs. So basically, in the diagnosis system, we use many parts of our body as a source of the biomarker. For example, in the blood, we can detect many metabolites, proteins, mRNA, or gene. To detect gene, we can use a genomic analysis, just like a PCR, or now the most famous nowadays, genetic NGS, next generation sequencing. For the mRNA and the product of the gene itself, we can use transcriptomes. For the protein, we can use proteomics analysis, etc., etc. And we also have several other components of biomarkers, just like the VOCs, which can be mapped. We can see the pattern by using certain technologies, actually. So the databases of until recent studies here, I tried to look from the Journal of Chemistry, mentioned that actually we have around 60 kinds of the VOCs in our breath. All the VOCs here are detected in our breath, and the most amount of them are in the alkaline types and alkenes. Here you can see in the left side of the presentation here. So actually, if we detect there is no kind of unique or maybe just one or two VOCs, which make everybody different? Actually, no. Most of us usually comprise of having such these 60 kinds of the VOC. However, the certain composition, the proportion, the amount of each VOCs will be different, will be vary according to our condition or maybe to our day of living, to our food, and etc. So based on that knowledge, actually the recent technology, the recent knowledge has already accumulated so many data that gradually we have ability to put a certain pattern to know a certain VOCs that can be used as a biomarkers for certain disease. For example, here, the paper in the semester mentioned that, for example, in asthma, you will find the increased amount of the VOCs called as a malondialdehyde and the 8-isoprostane. For COPD, there will be increase in the proportion of the hydrogen peroxide and eicosanoids. Or maybe also there is an increase in the isoprostane and malondialdehyde, however, also followed by other decrease with other composition of the VOCs. And for other diseases, just also the same. So such a pattern now can be used as a way to screen such a disease. Like the same we are as a physician, we can diagnose a disease by recognize the pattern of the symptom, right? So such a pattern of symptoms now apply to the pattern of the VOCs within human spread. So how we can detect such a pattern in the VOCs? Actually, basically, the technology to detect the VOCs comprise such a scheme, such a schematic workflow. First, as the VOCs can be accumulated by a certain containing materials, for example, maybe a plastic or a bag or maybe like a glass like this. And the container may be, now we have several technologies that can be used to increase the capacity to contain more VOCs, like using condensing system or using like the humidification to make sure that the water cannot contaminate the VOCs, etc. So many technologies now try to improve such a just only the containing properties of the VOC detection technology. And then there is also a delivery system, and the last will be there is a sensor system, where this sensor system is usually comprised of many technologies try to interpret the pattern of the VOC itself. And the last, then we can finally the interpretation of the sensor able to determine whether a person is positive or negative for the such a disease, or maybe we can detect or depict the pattern recognition in a certain disease. So there are many, ladies and gentlemen, many kind of the technologies can be used for describing or detecting the pattern of VOCs. Here let's say there are a summary of some of the technologies, but mostly we can classify it into two. If you see here in this table, we can see that there are two kinds of technology. First is technology using mass spectrophotometry, comprised of several technology like SEFT is like ion flow tube, or PTR is a positron transfer reaction, like a high-tech technology, and GC is like a gas chromatography. But this kind of mass spectrophotometry usually quite expensive and have a large and heavy equipment, which is not suitable for a bedside application or clinical application. Usually can be put just in the lab. However, we have the other technology is to implement a array of sensors, maybe 10 or 12 sensors that work together to be able to measure the composition of a certain VOCs that can be used as a biomarker for certain disease. Of course, each of these technology have their own weaknesses and they have their own benefits. Then we as a clinician maybe in the later can be use this knowledge to choose which one we will be used for our application. So the picture here shows that this is the left one is mostly, this is the kind of technology of the positron transfer reaction of the mass spectrophotometry, where we can easily measure what kind of VOCs that can be found in the one disease, and then measure the concentration directly. So such a mass spectrum photometry is present. And for the one here, the last one here is also the same. This is also using mass spectrophotometry. However, this is in the schematic representation, we can see that there is a kind of a condensing, or like a can or container which able to accumulate all the breath, including the VOCs, to be able to see more easier for the VOCs. So that's a little bit about the knowledge on the VOCs, or smell or odor of our breath. So let's move on to the COVID-19 itself. So I'm trying just to remind you all that until now, just like Dr. Gindo mentioned previously, that COVID-19 are still lurking out there. Now we have the new variant of XBB, said that actually maybe produce lesser and milder symptom. However, they are still infectious, so we have to be more cautious. What makes us more cautious? Actually, since the beginning, COVID-19 are very difficult to diagnose. As a clinician, especially just Dr. Anis mentioned, as a pediatrician itself, myself have been facing many difficulties in diagnosis COVID-19, especially in children, because most of them are coming asymptomatic or without any symptom. Even though we have several symptoms like a cough, fever, and shortness of breath, however, the symptoms are not specific. The pattern is not specific, and we have to differentiate it with other disease, such as just a common cold or influenza or other else. So as a clinician, actually, we have to depend on the several additional examination, like maybe complete blood count, X-ray, and maybe now we can rely on the rapid antigen or antibody, which have the antigen antibody based examination, or maybe PCR based examination. However, please remember that in the March 2020, when the COVID-19 firstly introduced, we don't have such a technology. So nowadays we have the serology-based, molecular-based of the diagnostic kit for the COVID-19. Actually, just I mentioned right now, we have ability to perform the PCR to detect directly the component of the virus, or we can use the rapid antigen examination by taking the samples from the swab. However, both of them are still using swab of the nasopharyngeal or from the nose as a sampling method, which several persons mentioned that it is quite invasive and hurting. So at the time, before the presence of the technology system, we try to develop a new system based on the VOC's pattern profile. We call it as a COVID-19 diagnosis based on the surrogate biomarker using the pattern of the VOC itself. So actually, ladies and gentlemen, between 2 years, many studies try to depict the pattern of the VOCs in the COVID-19. We identified around here 6 studies which able to evaluate what kind of pattern coming in the VOCs of the COVID-19. And when we use the pattern of the COVID-19, actually, they produce quite decent accuracy. Here you can see that in all study, the mean of the accuracy sensitivity can reach until 98.2% and 74.3%. But for applying of the mass spectrophotometry, yeah, it can reach some modest accuracy. However, for in the further improvement, we can also increase the accuracy and the performance of such a technology. The first report regarding the breathborne VOC coming from China here. So at that time, the study of House 1 mentioned that there are certain pattern of the change in the composition of the breathborne VOCs in the COVID-19. You can see here in this table that this is the one as one of signature of the VOC from COVID-19 is the increase of ethyl butanoate. Here you can see, which is accompanied by the low level of acetone. You can see that all of the patient here, COVID-19, healthcare worker, even the other infectious disease showed increase in the isopropanol. However, for the patient with COVID-19, usually having a relatively low isopropanol, but for the patient with the respiratory infection can have higher upper respiratory higher amount of the isopropanol. So based on such a pattern, we try to identify whether it is true that the ethyl butanoate, high ethyl butanoate accompanied by the low level acetone and a low level of isopropanol can be used as a signature map of a COVID-19. So there is actually, ladies and gentlemen, if there is a single VOC as biomarker as a biomarker of a disease, it's a wrong paradigm, wrong way of thinking. So biomarkers cannot be determined by solely one VOC. However, we have to make a map of certain, or maybe 1, 2, or 3, or several VOCs, and such a map then comprised into the one pattern, and such a composition in the letter can be used as a signature of the biomarker. So further improvement in this study, which is published in the Journal of Breath Respiratory, showed also that in the COVID-19 there was also increase in the several other VOCs, unknown VOCs, which is now still under investigation rather than only ethyl butanoate. So by combining, because of the necessity to perform a combination of the VOCs mapping, so here it is necessary for us to use a helping tool. That is why it is coming the artificial intelligence, or AI. Several combination of the VOC also shown by the research from the Ruskewitz, which is published in the Lancet. Here you can see that there are for the patient with the healthy and the patient with COVID-19, you can see that there is no single VOCs can be used as a biomarker. However, you can see that there are different patterns, different composition, which can be noted, which in the later, when we use like a plotting diagram, we can see that the positive and the negative COVID-19 can be separated by using several help of the algorithm. Using such a knowledge as a basis, our electronic nose, which is kind of a POCT, like a point of care testing. Just mentioned previously, I mentioned the mass spectrophotometry has a very high sensitivity, but the machine is very big. But we can use a technology of sensor array maybe comprising around 20 sensors that can be used to describe the pattern of the VOCs, which is now different between the healthy person and the person with disease. You can see in this illustration that, for example, if the person exhales a single breath, if a healthy person, you can see that all the pattern of the VOC are high. However, in the patient with certain disease, we may find a different composition, a different proportion, a different volume of the VOCs. Such a pattern in the letter can be read, can be recorded, and can be used as a basis data of AI. So to be able to get the good data of AI, it is important, ladies and gentlemen, to have a good technology, especially technology in the sensors. At the first, our team working using a very specific sensors designated to detect just solely for COVID-19. However, for the mass production, that kind of specific sensor is not working. It is very expensive. So we are now moving to the industrial sensors, which already been having their other line of calibration. So sensors like ECM, quartz crystal microbalance found their own weaknesses, but in the manufacturing process, but they have their own benefits when we are using the sensors for research. So later in our technology, we use what we call as a metal oxide sensors, and such a metal oxide sensors also used by all other electronic nodes around the world. When we work on all of the several arrays of the sensor here, we can see that here other device using there are device using 10, for example, pen nodes. Yes.
Excuse me, Mas Dian.
Yes.
Gentle reminder.
Yeah.
Another 3 minutes, please.
3 minutes. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Anis. We almost finished. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Anis, for reminding. So these sensors in the letter can give us a certain read that can be used for the artificial intelligence. And for our electronic nose itself, you can see here, ladies and gentlemen, that the volatile organic compound will be read will be caught by the several sensor array, and the several sensor will produce several data, including the maximum, the median, and the pattern, and that the evaluate the pattern using a line of artificial intelligence algorithm, which is in the later we will choose which algorithm is the best one. So this is maybe a little bit shown that how we can develop such electronic nose and also the artificial intelligence since 2016, when we found the electronic nose as a mark 0. And then in the later on the 2020, we tried to perform the profiling study to depict the pattern of the COVID-19 and perform the validation test. Until 2021, we able to develop the AI containing 600 breath profile, which can be different, which can different, we can differ a breath profile of patient with the COVID-19 and non-COVID-19. And the later, this AI keep on growing with the new variant database, and we are now having an AI with around 6,000 samples, and including per person with the COVID-19 XBB variant already inputted in our database and our artificial intelligence. And on 2022 and 23, we are now developing the same electronic nose for TB, tuberculosis, and pneumonia, sepsis, and other cases. So our machine actually using around 10 sensors. These 10 sensors are all MOS system with the industrial sensors, which mostly able to selective target several of the gases actually. And so using several of these sensors, we are at the first screening around 600 breath profile containing of 300 is from COVID-19 positive, and 200 is from COVID-19 negative. So the result of the study, the first study, is been published in the Nature. Here we can see that there is a separation for the person with the positive and negative. We can make a classification here, and the best AI to produce the best accuracy is a DNN algorithm, or deep neural network algorithm. But for a glance, you can see that if person with the negative COVID-19, you can see that there is this black curve is in the peak position, but person with positive COVID-19 is accompanied by this orange and yellow curve, which is resulted from sensor S2 and S9. But this is the black one, is the sensor from S8. So such a pattern has become the basic of our ability to recognize the difference between COVID-19 positive and negative. However, the real pattern, the real variation is very complex, and then that's why we need AI to be able to help us to different to determine whether is it not COVID-19 positive and 19 negative. So the last slides of mine showing the challenge when we are trying to distribute all our machines throughout Indonesia. In our perspective, the challenge is happen when we perform clinical tests, we perform diagnostic tests around Indonesia. So in the beginning, we found that we have a very high sensitivity and specificity because we are doing the research in the limited hospital setting. However, after we distribute throughout Indonesia, and especially in the 8th hospital, we have a decrease in the accuracy. However, it's still good enough to be used in the clinical setting. Furthermore, we try to distribute to Aceh until Papua, and here we found a variation in the sensitivity, specificity, and accuracy. And what determines such a variation? We found that there are certain mutation in the virus, and also there is an influence of some determinant factors like food, race, geographical change, inflammatory cytokines, and maybe variation also in the sensors itself. So based on that data, we found that there is a change in the importance in each sensors in the machine according to the location and the application of the electronic nose, which lead to us to the message that it is important to keep growing the AI, to keep accumulating the database, to keep adding the breath samples from all around Indonesia, to be able to make the AI more smarter, and change the AI from a static learning status into reinforcement learning or active learning. So whenever a person use the genomes, maybe for example in Aceh, and they put the data inside the machine, and such a data can be used automatically to update the database. That's such a condition, what we call as a hybrid learning, and active reinforcement learning has been published in Artificial Intelligence and Medicine and proved to us to be able to increase the accuracy between the AI software. So when we launched the first Ginos on 2020, our version is version 1.3, which is only a modest accuracy, but now we have 38 kind of updates in the software, and now we have ability to increase the accuracy into around 92 or 93%. So the last slide here mentioned that the key message on using volatile-omics, using the VOCs as biomarker, is actually volatile-omics possesses the potency to be a future diagnostic method which are easy, non-invasive, and not hurting. However, we need to improve. We need to accumulate more and more data on the VOC species in the breath based on the region also. For now, we already have like a data accumulation from Japan, Australia, and Malaysia, as we realize that the VOCs pattern in Malaysia, in Japan, in Taiwan, even in Australia, even in Indonesia itself, but in the different island will be different, and it is necessary to put like correcting factors in the AI. So here, the role of artificial intelligence algorithm to help us to determine, to analyze such a pattern is a must, is inevitable. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you very much for your attention. This is just a remark for our contributor. We have lots of team from the beginning. In the beginning, we only have 4 members, but now we have lots of members that help us to contribute this research. Thank you very much, Dr. Anis. Thank you for the time.
Okay, congratulations and thank you very much, Dr. Dian and team, for the interesting presentation and sharing. I think this session also provided us with new understanding about VOCs. Based on my personal experience, I know VOCs, I think it is existed since 300 years ago, but it was a very niche also in this company. But when you mention VOCs since 400 years before centuries, it is very interesting. And I think in this kind of context, when you mention about several information technologies, especially using big data and also the artificial intelligence, I think we need to discuss more detail, especially after we invite last but not least, new speakers from the Digital Transformation Office. We invite Mas Faris. Are you already in this forum?
Hello.
Mas Faris Naufal Rahman?
Yes. Hello.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Mas Faris. Mas Faris, I just would like to introduce you to the participants of this conference. Mas Faris Naufal Rahman formerly was graduated from Institut Teknologi Bandung and later on continue his study, master study in Aachen University. And he currently the head of product at the Digital Transformation Office. As you know, it is a new office at the Ministry of Health, which is currently very instrumental on developing either on the technologies as well as supporting the new regulation in the context of digital transformation in Indonesia, especially during the pandemic. So in this session, we would like to invite Mas Faris to share regarding the prospect of PeduliLindungi as the new model of citizen health apps in Indonesia. So
Yes.
welcome, Mas Faris, for the next 20 minutes to share this topic.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. I hope that you can see my screen, and I hope that you can hear me well.
Yes, please.
Okay. Sorry, am I screen sharing or?
Yes.
Okay. All right, I'll start my screen sharing. Okay. Yes, thank you for the introduction. So, just to introduce myself again, my name is Faris Naufal Rahman. I'm here as part of the team in the Digital Transformation Office, as part of the Kementerian Kesehatan Republik Indonesia with the Ministry of Health. And today I will talk about how the transformation of PeduliLindungi, how we would transform PeduliLindungi from an application that is solely focused on handling the COVID-19 into something that is more should be more used widely as a general health application. So yeah, these are the outlines. Yeah, of what I will talk about. I'll just move on into the first segment. So this is the story of PeduliLindungi so far. Yeah, as we are handling COVID-19 during the pandemic, I think from late last year until today, we have a lot of features that is with the purpose of handling or mitigating the COVID-19 pandemic. We have digital tracing. We also have the health alert and mobility screening. We have, as probably one of the most used feature, is the COVID testing feature, and also the vaccination feature, where you can see the results of your test results and also the vaccination certificates and so on. And also there's also you can check the availability of hospital beds, and also the telemedicine. We have a sort of like marketplace where you can choose which telemedicine providers that that you would like to use. And currently we have around 102 million users, and this is still growing because every day there are new users that is also downloading and using the PeduliLindungi app. At our peak usage, we average around 8 million daily active users per day. And also, again, when we're talking about PeduliLindungi as a application to view your vaccine certificate, certificate has been able to be viewed in the application. So this is what we have been doing during COVID. Yeah, and okay. And next, when we're talking about transformation of healthcare in Indonesia, these are the 6 pillars that guides us, I would say, in our transformation journey. First is the primary service transformation, where we talk about puskesmas, posyandu, and health cadres. We empower them on this transformation. And second is the secondary services transformation, where we talk about hospitals and how we could improve the way each system store data and how they will communicate within one another. And third is the health security system transformation, where we talk about pharmaceuticals, medical equipment, and also we're talking about lab systems and services in Indonesia. And underlying those are 3 more pillars. First is the health financing, where we would make it easier, I would say, to incentivize, let's say, healthcare workers during their work. Also, the health human capital transformation, where we are looking into how we could improve the internship mechanism that's currently in place in Indonesia. And then, of course, last but not least, is the health tech transformation, how we would utilize more of technology within the healthcare transformation. So these are the 6 pillars that guides us within the transformation. And what's in it for the users? How will the users see it? How will the users benefit? So in short, basically, is that as a user, you would be able to see how your medical data is being digitized, starting from the day you are born until you are old, and then until death, would say. And yeah, this is basically what's in it for the users. What's going to happen for the users is having your healthcare data being digitized in all aspects. So what will the digital transformation team do? How is our roadmap? What is our priorities? What is actually that we're doing to achieve these goals, right? First of all, if you can see on the left side, we have the priority activities. We have 3 priority activities. First is what we call the integration and development of health data. What it is basically we are standardizing. We are making a standardized sets of healthcare data. So, for example, how you would or how a system should record, let's say, a diagnosis, a certain diagnosis, it should be standardized. We're using a FHIR standardization for that. And then not only we standardize the data, we also create a we also build the architecture, because we're talking about a data platform, right? A data platform. We're building the architecture so that the platform can support these incoming big data that we are going to collect in the future. And second is what we call the application system, the integration and development of application system. What it is that after we have standardized the data, after we have created a standard on how the data should be sent and how the data should be stored, we then create a system where the data should be able to be interoperable. What it means is that these data is not stored for nothing. This data is stored to then be processed and be used and being utilized by other platform. In this case, probably we are talking about PeduliLindungi, or what we call citizen health apps. The data that we have standardized, we would then be able to be processed and be displayed in the citizen health apps, right? That's what we call by the application system. And third, we are talking about the health tech ecosystem development. What it is that, again, this data will then be able to use in other platforms, not only within the Ministry of Health, but also we're talking about the regulatory sandbox for the whole healthcare ecosystem. So basically, the data will then be able to use by let's say other health techs in Indonesia for the purpose of being able to serve the patients better. So basically, the whole digital transformation that we are doing, the goal ultimately is to be able to serve the patients better by having a more visibility on their health record, and how these health record can then be reutilized, I would say, to by different healthcare facilities in order so that they have a better view of the customers that they're dealing with. So yeah, this is the sort of the roadmap of what we're doing up until 2024. In this section, I would share a bit about the interfaces of what it is that the core of the digital transformation, and what touch points will there be within the core platform. The core platform, or the core of what we're doing in digital transformation office, is that we are building a platform, right? As I mentioned before, it's called the Satu Sehat platform. The Satu Sehat platform will think of it like a data platform where we are able to receive data that is being sent from different healthcare facilities, which then be standardized into a format, and then we would be stored, and we have regulation or standard regulation on how we store it. And after that, after it's being stored in the Satu Sehat platform, this can be utilized in different areas. For let's say, as I mentioned before, this can be utilized in PeduliLindungi or the citizen health apps to show their personal health record, and by knowing their current health status, we could probably send them sort of different healthcare articles that are relevant for their current state of health. And after that, for the government, we're talking about how these data that we have collected, that we have stored, can be be put into a dashboard, where this dashboard will then be able to make it easier for the government to sort of make decisions regarding healthcare. And of course, we're talking about other health industries. We're talking about how this data can then be interoperable between different healthcare facilities. Think of it something like if you go to hospital A this week, and then next week you go to hospital B for some reason, hospital B will then be able to sort of know what are your previous diagnoses in other hospitals that you have been to. This is, again, as I mentioned before, the goal is to be able to serve the patients better. And of course, this sharing of information is not it's not loose, I would say, because this will be a lot of governance within those, so that it will require consents, user consents, and it will require the implementation of a proper know your customer or the KYC, to understand that to make sure that the person who access a certain medical record is the right person, right? So basically, this is what we're doing right now. These are the touch points of what digital transformation will do. Not only is the Satu Sehat platform, not only that we are transforming, we are also transforming the usage of PeduliLindungi, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, that we are transforming PeduliLindungi from an application that is solely focused on COVID-19 into an application that is more for general health. And the value proposition of PeduliLindungi, because we already have Satu Sehat platform where we store all the healthcare data. So the value proposition of PeduliLindungi is to show and to develop a personal health record for each users. We design it so that the patients will have a complete control over the data stored at Satu Sehat, and therefore they have the power to say like, hey, I don't want my data to be stored in Satu Sehat platform. I don't need my data to be stored in PeduliLindungi, and there is something within the power of the user. And then second is that when we are talking about interoperability, as in my previous example, where Hospital B wanted to have my health record in Hospital A, within that transaction, it requires a consent from my side as the person that owns my health record. So patients can give their consent through the PeduliLindungi application, and also to make sure that only me that can access my health record. We will also be implementing a KYC or know your customer procedure for the users. So we understand that displaying personal health record is displaying a very sensitive information, right? And therefore, these are the measures that we take in order for that the data is being utilized correctly by the correct person. So this is the plan to transform PeduliLindungi. And then, what can you expect when during this transformation? These are our design explorations on the new PeduliLindungi app or the new citizen health apps that we're building. Basically, you will not only see COVID, but we are also developing other use cases like diabetes, like maternity, and child health, and so on and so forth. We would make it so that we have a structured sort of components within it. So in every different services, there will always be like a structure within them, so that it will be easier for you to switch between different services. So these are the explorations that we're doing. So for example, this is the module or the features called the digital maternal and child health, or the KIA as we say it. They will you can monitor your pregnancy. You can check. There will be like a screening and a screening where you can check your risk factors and also the recommendations that you will receive. And then there's educational contents. As you can see here, we are also going to be able to show the USG picture as well in PeduliLindungi app. We are connecting not only the data, the raw data, but also we're connecting data from devices. So, for example, from the USG devices, we are also getting the images and being able to show that also in the citizen health apps. These are more details of what you can expect in the transformation of the PeduliLindungi app. KIA or maternal and child health is only one feature out of so many features that we are going to build in PeduliLindungi app. Of course, this will be done in phases, like you would not see everything all at once. But I guess this should provide a clear picture, yeah, of what you should expect. And as you can see here, these items, these variables, this will be received from Satu Sehat platform. So the objective is that we are going to receive all the data from Satu Sehat platform. Yeah. I'm sorry, did I just drop?
Hello, Mas Faris.
Yes.
But I can hear you now.
Okay. I'm really sorry. I guess I just dropped out of the Zoom call. Let me just
Okay.
reshare my.
Yeah, please.
So okay, I was here. Okay, just to continue, yeah. As I was saying, that all this data will be fed from the Satu Sehat platform. What it means is that as a mother using this feature, when you are when a mother is being is pregnant, you don't need to input all these details by your own. You don't need to input like your baby weight or the healthcare metrics on your own. This data will be fed from Satu Sehat platform. Satu Sehat platform will receive this data from the healthcare facilities where the mother goes on her checkup. So if the mother go to Puskesmas inputs to the system will then push to Satu Sehat platform. Satu Sehat platform will then be able to push to PeduliLindungi or to citizen health apps in order to display this data. So that is the overall goal. And these are the last two slides. As you might probably be aware from my presentation, we are building a data platform, right? And we would require healthcare facilities to integrate within the platform. We would create APIs so that they can integrate their data into our platform. So basically, the success, I would say, the success of this whole digital transformation does not only depend on the digital transformation office team, but also other medical facilities. They need to be able to integrate themselves as well. And in order for us to do that, in order to push the adoption rate, I would say, of the integration, is that we will support by regulation. The Ministry of Health would have several regulations to actually push the requirements of this integration within the Satu Sehat platform. And also, you might be wondering by now is that we're displaying a lot of sensitive data, right? And how would the security be? This is something that we understand very well, and when we are working towards is that we are we are doing a lot of security works as well to improve our security. First of all, we are adhering to the ISO 27001 and also ISO 27799. And also we regularly run a privacy impact assessment during our product development to also check the compliance with UU PDP, yeah. And also after that, we have regular coordinations with the BSSN, Badan Cyber Sandi Negara, again to check the security of our platform, and of course to secure to implement secure development lifecycle within our dev security ops. So yeah, I think that is all from my side. Thank you for the time.
Okay, thank you, Mas Faris. I think it is a very interesting and useful insight from the Digital Transformation Office, especially in the process to transform the existing PeduliLindungi into the future personal health record to be used by all population, all community. So in this kind of session of Q&A, I would like to invite all three panelists to join together. Hello, Dr. Gindo. Are you already here? And also Dr. Dian, and also Mas Faris.
Yeah, we're here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Good morning, Dr. Gindo. I do not know how early right
It's
now in
8:30 in the
Helsinki.
morning here.
Okay,
it's
welcome.
8:30.
Welcome to this session. While we are waiting for the question from the participants, given that I'm a moderator, I have the privilege to ask first the questions. After that, I think we could invite participants to pose a question as well. First question, I think, to Dr. Gindo. Dr. Gindo, your presentation, I think, giving an interesting insight into Indonesia. In my opinion, first is also about the importance to provide or to implement open data for research. You mentioned many times about the GitHub availability to provide as data repository. What do you suggest for Indonesia, especially when Mas Faris already mentioned about PeduliLindungi, and also in the last slide, he mentioned as well about the data from the Ministry of Health for research and policy. On the other side, you mentioned that soon after the pandemic, you have many times raised about the availability of data for research. Any comment about that, Dr. Gindo?
First of all, thank you again for this opportunity. And I'm happy to share this platform with Dian and Faris. I'm probably going to speak less in future, and they are probably going to speak more on the future of health in Indonesia. So I'm very pleased I get to see them. I'm thoroughly impressed, and I'm very hopeful for Indonesia because there are people like them. Now, to your question, I do believe that we are behind in Indonesia compared to ASEAN 5 when it comes to data for research on health, access and use. So it's rather unfortunate. I'll give you two examples. The data on the Malay Mongoloid population is only available from Malaysia. Indonesia, we do not have that. And as you probably know, Sinovac and Sinopharm are the predominant vaccines in Indonesia and in Brazil. But we do not have effectiveness. We do have efficacy, trials efficacy, but effectiveness is something else entirely, and we do not have that. And I had to resort to Malaysia. That's one example. We could have done that because we have more data. Yeah, so that's a missed opportunity. The second example is the Asian Development Bank has just asked me to help Indonesia to deal with the problem of malnutrition in Indonesia. And Indonesia has a big problem of malnutrition. And it took us nearly 2 years to get data be used by researchers throughout Indonesia, from Aceh all the way to Papua, in order for them to study the rates and the risk factors and the policy implications for dealing with malnutrition in the 34 provinces in Indonesia. So we are a bit behind. Now, I talked to colleagues at Gadjah Mada who advised the government. I also talked to BPJS and some colleagues also in the Ministry of Health. I think the technology is there. The regulatory infrastructure is there. the undang-undang, as Mas Faris just showed in the last two slides. But in practice, or the implementation is still very far behind. So what to do? First, like I said earlier, I'm very hopeful that people like Dr. Dian and Faris are here. That's a good sign, because the back office or the infrastructure are really built on technologies that they're working on. But all the way to make sure that people in the puskesmas, people in the villages, I work a lot with kader kesehatan, connect and get all their information. There are steps that still fail along that. And so the implementation needs an extra money to support all the good things that are in place in Jakarta for it to be distributed throughout Indonesia. Lastly, and I'll stop after this, I'm glad that there are standards, FIRE and others that are being used. I hope more of that will be translated, will be explained very clearly to the lower levels of the department or the Ministry of Health, all the way to the Kabupaten Puskesmas Posyandu.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gindo. It is interesting to know that you also propose about the adoption of the standard to be implemented successfully in the low level, given that the different digital maturity level among the health facilities and also among region in Indonesia. And Dr. Gindo also mentioned about among the long problem on accumulating data and providing accurate data for research. And I think this session could be important to be continued, not only during the seminar, but also longer or sustained discussion between Dr. Gindo, Mas Dian, and also Digital Transformation Office. Later on, I would like to ask to Mas Dian. Mas Dian, you mentioned that you have implemented this kind of advanced studies, research. You involve many researchers from different groups, from the hospitals, and also many researchers from the Faculty of Medicine, and also partners from other faculties. Any insight about what are the challenges collaborating with people from different backgrounds first to develop the innovation? And secondly, I would like to ask you about the adoption of technologies after the innovation. We learned that during the, I think the second peak of the pandemic, it is massively used, the Ginos, but right now it is not common to see Ginos services in the current setting. Any concern about that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Anis, for the question. So allow me to ask the answer. The first question is the challenges to unite many persons in many institutions is to make them understand about the vision of the future. So to make them understand that we have the potential of the VOCs as alternative biomarker here is somehow it's difficult when we see that technology is not robust enough. In the beginning, there are always questioning how can breath can be used as a biomarker. What kind of, actually, Indonesians also always say skeptically, how can ABAP, they mentioned that ABAP means the breath odor, the smells can be used as a diagnostic. However, after we translate the knowledge into a more simpler and more acceptable ways, then they eventually believe that we can do this like that. And how can we do this? actually we have to understand the technology behind the detection rate itself. So actually, Mr. Anis, I have to learn a lot about the sensor technology and the algorithm of the artificial intelligence, aside from my major background as a pediatrician, as a medical physician, to be able to translate all the knowledge into medical officers, other medical officers, so that they can be in one group and go together with this research. So actually, until now, it's actually a very challenging for us to have a collaboration, for example, from engineer, medical doctor, and a lay person and the medical officers in the field, if they do not understand the advantages and the core behind the technology. So that's the key point, actually, Dr. Anis, try to make a good understanding, so the engineer understand how the medical thing works and the medical field understand how the technology works. Only with such a mutual understanding we can work together hand in hand. Without any understanding, or maybe just engineer just want to say, how can I help you? Just I will make the device, and then the device will not be fit into the medical procedure, actually. So vice versa. So, and the second question, maybe Dr. Anis, regarding about the recent concern of why Gindo is now not actively being found in the major. Actually, until now, Gindo is still being used in several hospitals, universities, and schools. Actually, but it's not the major usage anymore, because actually when the first Gindo was used as a screening tools in the public transportation, there are many flaws in the operational things. So actually, such a flaw can lead to the inaccurate result. Actually, many trainings has been performed, and yet we found many limitations in the operational, and also such a limitation cannot be overcome with the recent technology at that time, and then with that time recent AI performance. However, after we determined to, okay, let's stop the usage, let's stop the operational. At the time, we also discussed with Professor Wiku, let's stop for a while we are evaluate what is the flaw, and then we also stop in order not to, how should I say, to maintain, not to maintain, actually try to prevent the Gindos to be blamed further. So if at the time when we decide to stop, and the search of the virus is keep increasing, right? Actually, at the time we also try to prevent such a condition, like a political or maybe such a unbiased issues to Ginos, so that the Ginos can be going further and further right now. So we are now still growing. We are now still being used in the abroad itself. So even though in Indonesia there are not so many usage anymore, but now Malaysia, Japan itself, by a company named Tokai Denshi, has been put Dignos technology in their breath analyzer. Usually they develop analyzer for drinking, to make sure there is no driver which are drunken, but now they adopt our technology to be used as a COVID-19 screening in Japan. So Australia also, we are now underwent some collaboration, and just like I mentioned previously, it is a must, it is a necessary to perform like a preliminary mapping for the VOC's pattern, because there are several variations which is have to be analyzed first to us to make adjustment to the AI itself. So big data is now very important, and big data will rule in the later for the diagnostic process. Thank you, Dr. Andis. Maybe that concludes my answer.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dian. Interesting insight. So I have several questions actually to Mas Faris. Mas Faris, hopefully you are still here. There are three questions actually to Mas Faris. First, I think from Mas Arka, he asked about the attitude and practice in Indonesia about sharing personal data. What is your concern about these issues, especially when we are sharing our national ID mostly through WhatsApp? And secondly, about How is the plan of DTO, given that you already mentioned about transforming PeduliLindungi as one of the application for maternal and child health, but actually there are existing application. For example, he mentioned one of the application called Mother Diary or Ibu Sahati or Halo Bumil, etc. Whether the program from PeduliLindungi is replicating the existing system, or what is the plan of DTO to collaborate with the existing program? And I think another question, I think from my side, we heard about yesterday, there is an issue about the data breach of PeduliLindungi. Any comment about that as well? Thank you. Mas Faris, please.
Hello,
Yeah, please.
can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear it very well. Hello?
Okay. Okay, thank you for the questions. I'm sorry, I need to close my video because I think the internet is struggling here.
Yeah.
I hope that is okay. But I get the first two questions. I will probably answer that first, yeah. First on the attitude and practice in sharing personal data, yeah, in Indonesia. We realize very well that this is something that as a government we need to take responsibility, yeah, on personal data for the users, not only those that they are given they are giving out willingly, or even those that they do not even know that they're giving out. So I think this is something, as I mentioned, what there are two things, yeah, in terms of how we are improving the platform of citizen health apps. There are two things that we are doing. First of all, when we want to share this data, when we are we as the users have full power, yeah, on how we would be able to control our data in the citizen health apps or in the Satu Sehat platform. What that means is that user can either opt in or opt out of the system. They can choose whether or not the platform is able to store the data or not, right? And even and after they have opt in, they can opt out again. Second is that the mechanism of consent. As I mentioned before, one of the big use case of using citizen health apps and the digital transformation of healthcare is that there will be an interoperability of data, right? And in order for one facility to share a data of a person to another facility, that would require a consent from the user, right? So it's not as simple as send data, right? There would need to be a consent from the user. Think of it like if I go to hospital A and then they ask for my data that was from hospital B, hospital A will trigger from a system and it will come as a pop-up in my PeduliLindungi application. It will say something like, hey, hospital A wants to collect your data from your previous encounter in hospital B. Is this something that you approve? Something like that. I mean, a mechanism of consent, this is something that we're exploring as well. And this is something that is a hygiene, I would say, for us. So, I mean, this would be something that would be implemented. And third, of course, we have what it's called the know your customer. As if we're talking about banking and financial technology, you have a very rigid KYC system, right? You need to have your KTP, and then you would need to take a photo, a selfie with your KTP. Those are things to prove that you are you, right? And even though currently, right now, it is not regulated in healthcare, healthcare does not regulate the KYC within healthcare, but this is something that we are working on. We are working on two things, yeah. First, from the regulation itself, how is the standard? How is the standard of KYC within healthcare? That's something that we're working on. Second is how will this be implemented on in the product? How will this be implemented in citizen health apps? In the application, how will the KYC process be? Right. Those are two things that we're doing, all to actually protect this data and to make sure that whoever accesses the data is the real person. So I think that I hope that answers the first question on sharing data and the practice in Indonesia. Moving on to the second question, about the collaboration. Why would PeduliLindungi or citizen health apps create another maternal feature while there are already a lot of applications in Indonesia, right? That is catering to maternal and children health. That is a very valid question, and I think the answer to that is that we, again, as I mentioned in my presentation, there is something that we are looking into, as in the collaboration with other health tech in Indonesia. There is something that we are looking into, right? But I think first of all, what we are trying to do why we are creating it inside the citizen health apps first is that because first of all the regulation is not there yet. The regulation is not there yet, and I think it is much simpler for us to sort of protect the data, to protect users' data while the regulation is not in place by having it within our own platform that we can control, something that we can control. Instead of having other health tech companies to get the data from Satu Sehat while it is not yet regulated, there is something more risky, right? But obviously collaborating with other health tech, this is something that eventually will be something that we are going to do in the future. I think if you remember during COVID times that you can do check-in with other applications, right, in Indonesia, like you can do check-in with Traveloka, with Gojek, with Grab. I think that is part of the collaboration, and that collaboration will only continue in the future. So it's more on why it's not a question of whether we will do it. We will do it. It's just a matter of when. Up until we can sort out sort of the regulations and the security. I think that should answer the question, the first question. And the third question as well. I'm sorry, I didn't get the third question.
Yeah, we heard that there is a rumor about the data breach on PeduliLindungi from one of the famous hackers just recently. Any comment about that?
On data breach, unfortunately, able to comment. I think that would be from our communication that would make an official statement on that. But what I can say from my side is that we're looking into it. We're collaborating.
Yeah.
Including security parties to solve that. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Gindo, Dr. Dian, and Mas Faris. Unfortunately, 90 minutes is not enough to discuss cross-cutting issues in COVID-19 pandemic. Hopefully that several questions, especially those who are not yet answered, we could continue the discussion. And I'm expecting that the organizer could later on continue the next conference specifically to discuss cross-cutting issues on COVID-19 pandemic, and especially to discuss several potential information technologies to support the Indonesian from the transition of the pandemic into endemic later. Thank you very much for joining this session. I return back the session to Master of Ceremony. See you. Bye.
Terima kasih.